what I did was transcribe Charlie Parker solos and a little bit of Sonny Rollins too, I would say, some Freddie Hubbard solos, some different things. So I was transcribing a lot and I was memorizing all this stuff. And I would sit in my room. My parents got worried about me at a certain point because they you know, I would sit in my room and just like obsessively you know, play bird lines in 12 keys, you know, for hours on end. And that's basically how I learned my vocabulary was just because I fell so in love with those shapes and hearing, you know, my favorite players of the day play those solos and make those harmonies and make those beautiful shapes on the horn. And there was something about it that I can't exactly describe, but there was something about falling in love with the geometry of jazz, falling in love with the shape of those lines. And you know, hearing those harmonies for the first time. I remember the first time I heard like the diminished scale, and or especially you know, you get to hear the classic Coltrane. You know, the first time I heard someone play that, I was like, what the hell is that? You know, I mean, it freaked me out. I was like, I have to know what that is. And of course, you know, Pat Zimmerly, who was my mentor, wouldn't tell me. He was like, no, you're not ready for that yet. Is what he said. So I was like, screw you, you know. But I went home and I tried to figure it out, and I couldn't figure it out, and no one would tell me. And so as a result of sitting at home for like a couple hours trying to figure out what this sound was that he had played and that I had heard, and that I was hungry to know what it was, I probably came up with 10 other lines that weren't the diminished scale at all, but that became stuff that I would play. So that's kind of the beauty of it in a way, right? I mean, it was like I had this real thirst to know what was going on, and even when I couldn't reach it, I was still figuring other things out at the same time. Like just because I had this need to figure out what was going on behind the music, you know, to find out what it was that made these people sound the way they did. You know, what was it that, you know, why would I listen to Billie Holiday and fall in love with that phrasing so hard? What was it about how she would sing a melody? And so then I would get kind of down to brass tacks and figure out, well, you know, she's doing this rhythmically with the phrases, and she's changing these notes, and she's being very economic with the way she sings. So I started to think in those terms, and also allowed myself to really be an imitator at that time. Also really allowed myself to kind of play the role of my heroes, like get into the role of, you know, what does it feel like to play a solo along with Johnny Griffin? What does it feel like to write down a solo and memorize a Sonny Rollins solo and play it along with the record and get as close as humanly possible to his phrasing and to his articulation and to his feel and to his sound? I immersed myself in all of that stuff. I mean, you know, to me it's like, you know, I remember going to see Matisse and Picasso exhibit when the first time it came around to MoMA. This was mid-90s, I went to see it. And they had this amazing retrospective of Matisse and Picasso. Everyone knows who Henri Matisse and Pablo Picasso were, right? So, you know, two of the greatest painters of the 20th century. And what was really amazing about it is you could see from their earliest works where they were both doing the same kind of stuff, like doing still lifes, doing nudes, you know, doing their studies basically, doing like getting their chops together. And so you would see the whole first third of the exhibition was you saw them basically getting it together, getting their licks together, working with color, figuring out form, figuring out, you know, all the things that they needed to do so that they could gain this new expression later on. And I look at it the same way. I mean, I tell my students, like, I'm unabashedly a fan of just, you know what, go through a period of really serious imitation for a while. I mean, that's the best thing you can possibly do. For most of you, probably at this age, I look in the audience, most of you are sort of at that age. I think that it would behoove you to do that. Because at a certain point, what's going to happen is all of that stuff will start, if you really do it adamantly, if you really do it diligently, all that stuff will start to melt and morph and become, it's like throwing ingredients into a stew. If you know, when you first make a soup, everything is kind of separate ingredients, and you have your carrots and you have your celery and you have your broth and you have this. But then over time, you know, and in jazz terms we're talking years, all that stuff starts to gestate and become something else, and it becomes like a mixture of something that's greater than the sum of its parts, right? So for me, that's kind of how I got to where I got, was by you know, doing some serious imitation of my heroes, and then, you know, playing tons of sessions and gigs, and all of that stuff starts to morph and become something else. Either, you know, sometimes just by osmosis, just through the weird wonders of the human brain, and sometimes on purpose. Sometimes because I said, oh, I'm kind of sick of my you know, my repertoire or my lexicon of vocabulary. So I would make a point to really change it at a certain point. And every so often I do like what I call a melodic house cleaning. And I'll sort of like say, you know what, I'm tired of, I always play this one thing in this situation, so I'll sit for an afternoon and I'll find 10 other ways to get through that particular tune, or maybe it's even like 4 to 8 bars. You know, I remember the first time a teacher had me play Have You Met Miss Jones, and of course, like most students do, you know, you can kind of play the A section and then you get to the bridge, and those 2 5s are foreign to you, and everyone folds, right? The first time you play Have You Met Miss Jones, the bridge is hard. And so after about 2 or 3 weeks, my teacher said, you know, man, like you're folding every time, you know, you need to go home and write out a bridge that works for you through Have You Met Miss Jones. Oh wow, well, like, I guess I could do that, you know. And so I did. I wrote out about 5 or 6 bridges that, you know, nothing special, but stuff that was logical and that worked for me at the time. And that was a great, and I always kind of refer back to that because it seems like sort of a mundane memory to bring up, but that process of just sitting and figuring something out and committing it to paper, like dealing with a musical issue, and not trying to throw in the kitchen sink and not trying to make it a masterpiece, but trying to make music that makes sense, that's germane to the issue at hand, that's germane to the harmonies that you're working with or whatever. It's pretty much what we do, you know. I mean, it's just that when we're improvising, we're not reading it off the page. We're you know, calling it from our subconscious, hopefully. But that's one of the. I always say that the 2 ways you can gain fluency in this art form is you can either steal it from, you know, from the great players that came before us, or you can come up with your own pathways yourself, your own melodic pathways, your own harmonic pathways, and that means sitting and doing it slowly by hand, you know, or I guess if you're adept on. I'm still not a computer guy in that sense. I still do everything on the page, but.